welcome to this webinar. My name is Marloes Reining and I'm from Solid Green Consulting, but also from Regenerative Collaborative South Africa, and I'll be your facilitator today. Our previous events, we are trying to upload them as quickly as possible. 5 of these are already uploaded, so if you want to see any of these previous events, just go to the website that is the www.greenet.co.za/LFCSA. And you can find these recordings from those sessions, and they're still available for CPD points. So if you're in need of CPD points and want to see some interesting presentations, please visit us there. The CPD validation would not have been possible without the sponsorship of Legaro, who sponsored this webinar. Legaro is a very exciting property development company that has bought into the green and sustainability completely with their first 2 developments, 76 and 78 Corlett Drive, which we will be talking about today. But they also have a number of residential developments in Johannesburg, which are all EDGE certifications. So they're really keen and they're great property developers. So a really brief introduction into International Living Future Institute and Living Building Challenge and where this is all coming from. So International Living Future Institute is an organization based in the States that is driving the mission that is building a world that's socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. And they're trying to do that through a number of programs that they have developed. And one of them is the Living Building Challenge, which we are mainly talking about now. And they also have a challenge for community, living community, and living product challenge, which is something that we're going to be talking about next month. We've invited a company that has 20 living product challenge certified products, and they're going to showcase that to us next month. So that will be very interesting for architects and interiors, and we will be inviting you for that one. They also have a number of other certification programs like zero carbon certification and zero energy certification, and a new one, which is the core green building certification, which we will also do a session on later this year. And then there's a number of transparency labels like Declare for materials, Just for companies, and Reveal. But more on this set of programs would be explained in an introduction into Living Building Challenge in one of our next sessions. So just briefly about Living Future Collaborative South Africa. We are a bunch of volunteers doing this work, bringing the word out there about the Living Building Challenge because it's super interesting and motivational and really bringing sustainable buildings to the next level. So yeah, please join us or follow our collaborative on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then back to Living Building Challenge. It's really a challenge for a path to a regenerative future, and especially for buildings. So the buildings that we are advocating here are not just sustainable, not just green, they are having a positive impact on the environment and on the social and cultural impact. So instead of doing less bad, we're trying to define what does good look like? What does it mean to bring good to a building, and how can you positively influence it? And so it refers back, as you can see in the logo, to the metaphor of the flowers. And this is what you will learn from the presenters as well today, is we're trying to mimic buildings that harvest all the energy and water from their site. And they are totally adapted to the climate that they are located in. It operates completely pollution-free and, is still very, very beautiful. So, and that is also one of the parts of the Living Building Challenge. So the Living Building Challenge initially is a philosophy and really like an inspirational system where you can learn from, and about efficacy, because not everything in the systems is always in line with regulations. So it's also about, making sure that wherever you're not be able to meet the requirements, you do advocacy, you go out there, you go to the municipality and talk and explain why you want to be doing this. And lastly is the certification system. So buildings can be certified at the end. One important thing, it's based on performance and not on design. So once the building has been in operation for 12 months, only then you can demonstrate that a building will be meeting the requirements of net positive water and net positive energy. So there are 7 petals in the system: place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And within these petals, there are imperatives. And to be able to be fully Living Building Challenge certified, you have to meet all the 20 imperatives. So there's no picking and choosing what you want to do. You have to meet everything, and you have to make sure that all these 20 imperatives are like integrated into the design of your building. So hence the name challenge. It is a challenge, but it's a good challenge. It's a very great challenge. So just to let you know which projects we are going to be talking about and which are the projects that are currently registered with the ILFI in pursuit of this Living Building Challenge certification. 76 Corlett Drive in Johannesburg, which is one of the buildings of our sponsor of today, Legaro Properties, designed by the Fabio architects. And I know that Enrico is going to join us today on the chat as well. So if you have any questions for the architect of the building, drop them in the chat box and we can discuss. That project is going to go for petal certification, so not full building certification, but petal, and they're targeting for energy, water, so net positive energy, net positive water, and beauty. Then we have a residential project in Cape Town, Rugby Road, and they are aiming for full Living Building Challenge certification. We currently, with that project, we're at the start of construction, so things will start to happen very soon. And then lastly, Fabio will be talking about the Green School, which is a super exciting project designed by gas architects. And they're targeting full Living Building Challenge. And that's probably going to be the first project. Well, it's not probably, they are probably very likely going to be the first certified project in South Africa. And Fabio will tell you about that project. But yeah, super exciting. The presenters, Denise is gonna, Denise is not gonna present herself. I'm gonna show you a video because she's got very bad internet connection at where she is. But that presentation is about net positive water and the projects that we worked on with her. Chilu is then gonna talk about net positive energy. And then we're gonna get Fabio to talk about the school that I just showed you. And lastly, we're gonna have Jessie talking about materials and the materials petal. I'm gonna hand over to Denise. Here we go.
Jade. I am the CCO at Enzo Earth. For those not familiar with that title, it is Chief Communications Officer. I also have my own blog called Jaded, but we will get to that a little later. Denise, our CEO, has asked me to step in and help with this presentation as she is traveling. Signal is a little erratic where she is, but she will be available to answer questions.
Hi everyone. I am listening in and have helped Jade compile this presentation. I am really pleased that you can all meet Jade, as she will have an important role to play in the organization going forward.
In South Africa, it is predicted that water demand will outstrip supply by 2030, with 65% of the population living in cities. But the people in the know are saying that we had already allocated all our water resources way back in 2002. So why is no one talking about this? Because they were technically gagged from releasing the information. Living in a country crippled by load shedding, what will our future look like when we must ration water as well? When Legaro heard this reality, they became determined to push a new frontier and embrace the design philosophy that would ensure water security for their building tenants. Starting off as a conventional commercial office building, the design solution seemed relatively straightforward. Coming from a process and industrial design background, Denise was accustomed to doing off-grid infrastructure solutions in remote off-grid locations. Water balances and water use licenses are part of that design environment. Johnny, from Isadema, is the lead wet services consultant for the Corlett project. Enzo Earth tagged along, as we had been working together on the Living Machine project, and it seemed the next natural step to do the living building together. However, transitioning an off-grid building into a municipal region brought an entirely new set of challenges to the table. Municipal bylaws needed to be met in a way that would satisfy both council and the certification process for the Living Future Institute. True off-grid buildings are not permitted within a municipal region. All stands are required to have a potable water and wastewater connection, and a stormwater attenuation solution. As a direct result of Day Zero in Cape Town, the bylaws have been influenced, and has resulted in some grey around harvesting rainwater and upcycling wastewater. ILFI, however, have restrictions that need to be met under these circumstances. The most important was a metering system on the inflow and outflow on the property to record any incidents where the closed-loop design was infringed upon. But beyond that, it was a very standard closed-loop design, until COVID hit us, and everything changed. Legaro made a strategic decision to pivot the building's functionality away from an office building towards medical suites. This was in response to the sudden drop in demand for office space due to remote working, and the increase in demand for medical facilities. Unbeknown to any of us, what this decision did was catapult them into further uncharted water, as the ILFI had never certified a building in this category for net positive water. Of the 600 globally certified buildings at the time, only 50 had been net positive water certified. Where we started with the first commercial building in Africa seeking net positive water certification, we were now designing the first medical facility in the world to seek certification for net positive water. What fundamentally changed was the pathway for certification relating to the hot water system. In conventional office buildings, the hot water was a secondary service, dealt with as part of the cold water system, with on-demand heating via a heat pump, or similar approved. In the medical facility, the hot water supply became the primary service, and needed to be available 24/7. Furthermore, we also needed to retain the minimum chlorine levels in the hot water system for health reasons, which in the conventional office facility were extracted from the cold water system at point of use. These were the two criteria that resulted in the formulation of the new pathway and building category. The ILFI was supportive and held our hand through the process, and accredits to their commitment to find the certification process that suits the client's needs as well. The big question is always what is net zero and what is net positive. The difference is what allows us to move beyond sustainable to regenerative. Net zero occurs when the water consumed is the same as the amount of water that is recycled. And net positive is when the water recycled is greater than the water consumed. In this particular case, we are recycling 60 to 70% of the water on the site. So in summary, a net positive water strategy delivers an off-grid, ecologically balanced design that mimics a natural system while addressing water harvesting, wastewater treatment, and stormwater management, without disrupting the natural water cycle of the site. So how do we create an ecological water balance? First, we have to aim for the targets that have been set by the pre-development conditions, paying attention to runoff, infiltration and evaporation. Only by rationalizing the water demand as fit for purpose can we create an optimal water balance for a project. We then look at the wastewater system to reuse, reclaim and recycle as much as possible, in order to avoid the double-dipping cost of using potable water for toilet flushing. And lastly, we look at stormwater management, but this is integrated with rainwater harvesting for potable use. Rainwater is one of our purest forms of potable water, requiring the least amount of effort to purify, and is not allowed to be used for toilet flushing in the living building. It should be used exclusively for potable water. It is by harvesting water locally for potable water use that we are able to decentralize to an off-grid solution, which is really the solution that economic water-scarce Africa really needs. The potable water demand can be reduced by 60% to 95% of the normal consumption depending on the design philosophy, with water usage further reduced by incorporating water-efficient devices such as composting toilets, waterless urinals, and hand basin sprayers. Then we look at the wastewater system. We need to change our lens here and see wastewater as a valuable resource. By recycling the nutrient-rich wastewater, we are able to use the reclaimed water for irrigation and urban farming, as well as for non-potable uses such as toilet flushing and area washdowns. A biotreatment system is really the heartbeat of the wastewater reclamation system, as it mimics nature's purification process without the use of harmful chemicals. What is the value add from adopting net positive water strategies? It improves the resilience of development against municipal supply interruptions, which indirectly will contribute to higher productivity rates for tenants. It relieves the stress on municipal services, indirectly increasing the capacity of the municipal system while also reducing local and catchment flooding risk. We enable a positive environmental impact by restoring the natural hydrological conditions. Harvested rainwater is free from micropollutants and pharmaceutical products commonly found in municipal water harvested from surface water. And by adopting a closed-loop wastewater reclamation system, we also prevent all of the above from entering and contaminating our water resources. The design we implemented also incorporated the option for seamless municipal backup, further increasing resilience of the system. The time of being able to ignore your corporate social responsibilities are over. As we move forward out of the global impact of COVID, we are seeing the impact of ESG on companies' investment value. It is now more relative than ever before. We are currently refining the business case as more accurate costings emerge as we move forward into the construction phase. Some of the key assumptions made are that net positive water will result in higher rental and occupancy rates, especially as water scarcity becomes the new load shedding in South Africa. Accredited developments will increase in value at higher rates than the market average, currently conventional buildings performing at 7% and their green counterparts at 10%. Municipalities will still require service connection fees to be paid even where consumption is zero. Municipal supply costs will escalate at a constant rate, even though we know that water remains undervalued and that escalation will exceed inflation. While we have a notable increase in capex in the vicinity of about 3.5 million, we have a dramatic reduction on OPEX from 120,000 to 40,000 annually. So given all the above factors, we are still anticipating a return on investment in the vicinity of 12.5%. What does this mean for the African frontier going forward? How can we scale this to include a living community challenge in the near future? We are currently working with Mascom Water to further develop this business case with regards to the Claris Fusion biotreatment system. With a single dwelling installed cost in the vicinity of 200,000 versus 40,000 per individual dwelling in a cluster of 80 homes. So please contact us if you want to help push the frontier forward. Thank you for listening in and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Denise. Denise is on the call, so if you guys have any questions on this, just drop it in the chat box. Okay, so we're going to move on to Chilu.
We presented on net positive buildings a few weeks ago, so we can see this as kind of like the next episode, or maybe the prequel, the one that should have come before that one. So for today's presentation, we'll just sort of dial it back a little bit and then just deal with some of the basics of all of this. And I think a lot of times now we see everywhere. We're talking about net positive carbon, net zero, and all of that. And often a lot of people don't really understand why that now has become the topic of choice in sustainability. And it all has to do with what is the right level of climate response to deal with the current issues. So with net positive buildings are basically buildings that are primarily powered by nature. And a few years ago, we used to speak a lot about biomimicry. And I think the definitions of biomimicry and what you're trying to do with net positive or net zero carbon buildings are quite similar. But at the time when biomimicry was sort of being spoken a lot about, I think a lot of people, myself included, didn't really understand how it then correlates to the basics of what we do within the building environment. But if we look at some of now the key phrases that come from biomimicry, like borrowing nature's blueprints, mimicking the strategies found in nature to solve human design challenges, we'll start to see how a lot of those concepts are quite relevant now when we're talking about net positive buildings. But what to keep in mind is just the idea of what is the correct level of climate response for the current climate crisis. So currently, we know that pretty much all of nature is powered by the sun. So with net positive buildings, we're going to be seeing whether or not we can primarily power buildings in that way. Of course, there are many different sources of renewable energy, but when we're talking about the African frontier, this is probably one of our biggest and most underutilized resources. And when we look at the universe in general, the Earth is in just the right position. So it's not too far away from the sun that it's frozen and can't support life, and it's not too close either. And we'll see as we go along that a lot of things in nature are done to just achieve the perfect balance, not too much and not too little. So when we're trying to consider the new way of approaching buildings to be able to achieve these very sort of more challenging goals, is that we have to be building buildings that do just enough for what they need to be doing. And some of the tools that assist us in this fight to start to design for nature are things like the Living Building Challenge, net zero or zero energy certification that can help guide. But what everybody should note is that these are not sort of going to give you all the answers, because as Malus mentioned, these are all about performance. So in the end, it's agreeing to try and get to a particular outcome and then making sure you get there. And what happens when we don't design for nature is quite simply carbon, right? In South Africa, we then burn a lot of fossil fuels in order to power our lives, power our buildings. So this is the cause and effect. When we don't design for nature, we end up harming, or even at the current pace, destroying nature. So when we're thinking about the built environment, it's also important to recognize what nature can provide to assist us within the built environment. And one of the things that obviously is light, and we purposefully crossed out heat here because very often the pursuit of daylight ends up being with buildings that become inefficient because they are uncomfortable.
Sorry, Chilu, to just jump in there. I'm sure when you say light and designing for light, that a lot of architects on this call will think, okay, let me then do the thing that I always want to do and design a glass building. Is that the solution to like the light issue here?
I think the solution is always balance and getting the right amount for what needs to happen. So a lot the investigations and the design has to take into account that you want light, but you don't want heat. So what is the right amount of glass or light to bring into the building to just achieve what you want to do? So what we find often, which kind of takes things backwards, is that buildings can be very heavily glazed and have too much light, and then you just have to drive down Santon Drive to see a lot of buildings that have got a lot of glass but the blinds are down. and then the lights will be on. So that idea of balance already starts to sort of come through in terms of what you'd be trying to achieve. And then the second thing that nature can provide is cooling. And this is, of course, looking very much in our South African context, where we've got a great climate that can allow you to design passively in terms of your buildings. And images like this are ones we see all the time. You know, it's obviously very easy for you to draw a line that says the air must go in this way, but we see almost no examples of buildings that actually try to, from the outset, design for themselves to be cooled naturally by the outdoor temperatures and ensure that they are trying to be more in line with nature, with where they are.
So to jump in again, like, you know, you see all these nice arrows, and again, like architects, and no offense, I'm an architect myself, you know, we draw these arrows on these pictures, but is it really the way things are going to flow? Like, is there a science to design a building that can naturally ventilate itself?
There's definitely a science, but it's probably one that often is not used that much. But also the most important thing in getting any sort of alternative type of strategy to work is to just have a better building. So a building that would have needed very little cooling is then one that can work from a natural, a passive design, natural ventilation perspective. You know, we're not going to do 100% glazed building without any proper solar control and then still expect it to work, or still expect your arrows to then indicate comfort. Cool. And then the other aspect that nature can provide is warmth. So Johannesburg is a great example. Even though we do have famously cold winters, we have sunshine in winter most of the time. So during the day, there's a source of heat, and you know, these are all things that people sort of intrinsically know. So if you are looking at a house or a building and then they'll say it's great and it's north facing, it's because nature can also provide warmth. And of course, you have to always find a balance between providing that warmth in winter versus what you would need in summer. And if you had to then provide a little bit of additional energy in order to keep a building warm, it would then be for something like this in winter, trying to keep a building warm. And the point of these sort of three different elements is that if you had a building that could run in this way, you don't even have to start to talk about any kind of energy offset at all, because the building is just working. You don't need energy from anywhere, but you're harnessing nature in order for it to be able to operate. And then if we look and see, is anyone doing it? Madus mentioned a couple of buildings already in Johannesburg. I put one in there, which is our solid green office. And, you know, we are technically not yet able to be net positive because we don't have a connection to the grid. Even though we've got excess energy, we just can't give it to anyone yet. But I think we've had a lot of interesting experiences already in our office of trying to have a building that is more natural. So in winter, we rearranged all the desks to be along the glass because that's where the sun is. And that worked quite well for the most part, as long as the day has some sunshine. Cool, Malus, that's it from me.
Great, thank you, Chilu. And I'm going to hand over to Fabio, who's going to talk to us about the Green School.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fabio. I am founder and CEO of the Chilufya Group. We specialize in environmental, social, and regenerative design. And we're here to speak to you today about a story of hope and inspiration. This is Greta. Greta is a global symbol of hope and inspiration and a better tomorrow for all of humanity. And every day I'm inspired by our youth and their dogged determination to achieve their goals, no matter what the odds are against them. Bluntly, if our education system does not prevent us from destroying our environment, then no matter what qualifications we may have, it is insufficient and, simply put, irrelevant. So we really wanted to focus on the leaders of tomorrow with the educational facilities of today. Green School was conceived by John and Cynthia Hardy from Bali. It's a holistic student-guided approach. It's produced a number of leading young environmental entrepreneurs globally, and it's been recognized by global leaders, and the likes of Jane Goodall and Ban Ki-moon have graced the school grounds amongst other famous persons. So the typical green building benefits are well demonstrated across the education space. It worked, but it wasn't enough for our pioneering client, Alba Brunt. We really needed something that gave back, which was not less bad, but truly regenerative. And enter the Living Building Challenge, which is simply the most rigorous certification system on the planet. And it really resonated with the ethos of the Green School brand. So we were tasked with the certification of 5 clusters of LBC projects, full living building, and 2 petal clusters. You'll see each one of those clusters is actually a number of buildings, but we grouped them up into clusters, and we are running those concurrently. As Malu explained previously, there's a total of 7 categories and 20 imperatives. All 20 are mandatory, and the achievement can only be based on performance. So it must be running for at least 12 consecutive months, and you cannot model that. So we really had found the class of certification system which would challenge and inspire and create a living and breathing school. So we'll be focusing this experience share on 2 key themes, which really created the most interaction, challenge, and reward for the client and the professional team. So I've shared some really beautiful images of the project at the various stages of construction. This is a rapid introduction to biophilic design. It's a human connection to nature. This is one of the themes that we're going to be speaking about. And for those of you not familiar with biophilic design, it's about direct experiences of nature. So direct, indirect, and experiences of space and place. So direct experiences such as light and air washes across our senses. Water plays with our acoustic, visual, and olfactory senses. And our interactions with plants and animals and weather also play a part. There's also indirect experiences. So primarily a connection to nature, natural materials, colors, shapes, forms, and then a sense of space and place. So as sentient beings find anchors in those spaces and places. Biophilic design allowed the entire professional team to think freely and bring their unique interpretation of living, feeling, and experiential creative into the hard design of the project. And this involved cumulatively 8 hours. This is what LBC requires, 8 hours of workshop with the professional team where you ask the architect and the engineer and everybody to throw their titles out the window and just be human for the day and feel their way through the design. And it's a wonderful exercise as you move through those direct, indirect, and space and place categories to bring out almost childlike experiences of nature and design. In this particular instance, we're showing water. The attraction to water is often most pleasing and perceived as clean, in motion, and experienced through multiple senses. So your sight, sound, touch, taste, and movement. So together with the design team, we integrated these characteristics into the campus. So using things like water furrows, waterfalls. It's also integrated into the landscaping as wetlands and rain chains. So it evokes the full set of sensory experiences on site. From the tree-like patterns found on the columns of those pergolas, the shapes of building facades, to seed pod, macro and micro structures, and integrating parts to whole, which is one of those categories I talked about a little bit earlier, natural shapes and forms, all bioclimatically designed. These are found throughout the project. Just drawing attention to the natural form at the top there, the pomegranate seeds, those clusters of classrooms have got the unique space that they're connected to a whole without intruding into each other, and they have a central shared space. Some really, really interesting design features. And when you put an architect, a fire engineer, and a structural or facade engineer into the same conversation, it's bound to create some sparkling engagement. We certainly had a lot of that. And the main challenges with this imperative were addressed by focusing the team on an outcomes-based approach to achieve the design intent. Materials was particularly challenging. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but in a South African context, it was a big challenge. We put a lot of focused effort into transforming and influencing the South African market with regards to what we worked with in terms of the suppliers and the types of materials we worked with. Decro Paints, for example, developed a red list compliant blackboard paint, which was a South African first. And it goes beyond the blackboard paint, which is a really nice story. It's a story of hope and inspiration. So for each and every child and teacher and parent that scribes onto those boards, there's a story behind that. Anyway, and there were reams and reams of spreadsheets to keep track of all the various materials which we had to audit prior to them being ordered on site. Once they got onto site, we had to audit them as well. Carbon was also quite an exciting aspect to look at. OneClick, which is a software program, allowed us to balance decisions which are vital to the project's budget, timeframes, supporting the local economy, and environmental impacts. One of the major challenges with OneClick LCA was it was not contextualized to a South African context initially, but we managed to get them to revise their database, and that also really helped with work that we did thereafter, which is part of our influence story. And the principles used were simple. Just as Chilufya said on keeping things simple: source local, reuse, and reduce building materials. So Declare, which is a transparency platform, also provides consumers with honest information for product selection. Knitex, we produce shade cloth and supply the school throughout, are aiming to be a South African Declare product. They're busy going through that process. The major challenge on this really has been transparency of the ingredient lists with manufacturers. They really do run wild and free. That was a big challenge on the project. This imperative turned out to be an incredibly rewarding journey. We embraced local fully. We excavated sand, rock, clay from the foundations, adjacent farming areas. Excess materials were used, but is incorporated into structural and design aspects. We also included the reuse of half bricks from a conveniently placed nearby brick factory, so there was a significant amount of upcycling that took place. There was also a significant amount of testing on site to ensure structural integrity, color blending, texture correctness. It was a lot of fun and allowed for some excellent engineering. It was a learning curve for everybody on site. We excelled at salvage with a tenfold improvement on the LBC requirements. We used salvage doors, which also spoke to the aesthetic design and a specific imperative that speaks to the patina of time, where one can see the aging of various materials and aspects of the design. Composting also takes place on site at every opportunity. We've mentioned the recycled bricks already. The transformation of materials from nature frequently elicits positive visual and tactile responses, which few artificial materials can duplicate. So the use of bright colors that emphasize environmental forms, so things like flowers, sunsets, sunups, rainbows, were used and applied very specifically. This is a sneak peek into some of the classroom spaces, where a significant amount of natural material was used to anchor the surroundings, and those specific bright colors were used in the forms that were required. None of this would have been possible without Alba, who's a dreamer and a planet shaper, one of the most incredible clients that we worked with. Alba and her family loved the experience of Green School Paarl so much that she decided that Africa needed one. So she built one herself. That was then, and this is now. Green School opened in February 2021. It's aiming to be the greenest school in the world. And they're just finishing up with the last of the clusters at this point in time. They should be wrapping up shortly, within the next 2-3 months. These are some really great references. Green School's website, there's a video there as well. Please check out John's TED Talk, really, really inspirational in his famous Kikoi, and he's quite eccentric. And yeah, I think that's us, and just leave you with that thought about shaping minds. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fabio. That was awesome to see where the project is, and I'm really happy to see that the school is up and running. That's super exciting. I also know that one of the imperatives of the Living Building Challenge is that you're going to have open days. So please keep us up to date when those open days are, so that we can share that with our collaborative community. Cool. We're going to go through to the last presentation. I'm going to hand over to Jessie. Great. And Jessie will we'll talk about our experience with the materials, which is probably one of the most interesting petals of the challenge. People often think like net positive water and net positive energy is challenging, but from experience, we know that the material side, and Fabio also alluded to it, it's a real challenge. So chat to us, Jessie.
So Fabio, thank you for your presentation. It's really great to see the school. I think it's exciting when there's natural product that's being used, but I think in the case of our project, it's a high-end residential project that we're working on, so it's a little bit different in scope. But just a bit of background on me, I'm a sustainability consultant. I've been with Solid Green for quite a few years, and my background is interior design, materials product manufacturing, and I completed my master's degree in the Netherlands in 2019, and this building was my thesis topic, and focusing on embodied energy aspects and also the health of materials. The case study project that we used was for Rugby Road, and the health and embodied carbon calculation aspects were considered for this. And it's one of the first 2 high-end residential living building projects in South Africa. So the whole point is to raise the bar of sustainable development in the residential space. The architect is sitting in the US. The construction team is sitting in Cape Town, and the sustainability consultants are sitting in Johannesburg. So you can imagine how project team meetings go. But we have managed to put a database together of materials to date, and of all the basic green building principles in the Living Building Challenge, the energy, materials, and water are the most difficult and challenging to work with, as you guys have heard from Fabio. And as part of the updated Living Building Challenge, the version 4.0, the embodied energy carbon footprint is included in the energy petal. So we are looking to upgrade our rating to the version 4.0. And the material strategy for the Rugby Road project was to ensure that non-toxic, ecologically restorative and transparent materials were selected in the build. And the whole point of this is to stimulate the local building materials product market and advocating the market. So we're looking to upgrade the materials petal to version 4.0 for ease of implementation. And if we look at the imperatives, under the energy petal, it's required that we need to reduce CO2 equivalent embodied carbon by 20%. So to achieve this, we need to make sure that we have a baseline model for embodied carbon, and we need to use a calculator to do that. So in the case of what we did is we looked at eTool LCD, which is a free tool, and also now One-Click LCA has got a free tool to use. And then once you have your baseline model, you do your actual building, and hope that it's an improved case so that you can kind of verify what your carbon offsets are. So that's the calculation that we've worked with. And what we found was that contractors, engineers, and architect awareness and training has really been critical to ensure high impact materials like steel and concrete carbon is reduced. So we need to make sure that the contractor specifies the correct product. So once the contractor and the engineers work together and they use the right products, then at least we know that cement replacement mixes were used, recycled steel application was used, and wherever possible, we also try to convince the architect to specify cross-laminate timber, which has a lower embodied carbon aspect. And an interesting finding that came out in the research that I did is that the products with the highest embodied carbon had a lower health risk with regards to the red list and chemicals of concern. So the biggest difficulty we face at this point is really just to ensure that we have low embodied carbon materials on site and that there is an offset so that we don't need to purchase carbon offsets, because that can become costly depending on the carbon offset provider that we are going to use. And under the materials petal, the intent of the responsible material imperative is to set a baseline for transparency, sustainable material extraction, as Fabio said, support of the local industry, and waste diversion from landfill. So our biggest challenge at this point on the project is to get to clear label products on the project. So we've been working with suppliers and liaising with suppliers, trying to advocate the local suppliers to get a declare label. And it's quite an interesting process where you can online go and create the label. So that's also an interesting process that we found. And furthermore, we are ensuring that all wood is FSC certified, so it's from the natural forestry, and that the local sourcing minimum percentage of 20% of the contract sum is sourced from within South Africa, and as much as possible construction waste is diverted from landfill. And so the red list. The intent of the red list imperative is to foster transparency and to make sure that toxins and harmful chemicals are removed from the build through the lifespan. And as part of the version 4.0 tool, as we mentioned, there has been a reduction. So it's no longer 100% compliance, it's 90% compliance by cost. So that's a benefit to work with. And toxic chemicals like PVC, added formaldehyde, wet applied VOCs, added lead and mercury, to name a few, are components that are not allowed on the project at all. So to ensure that our products on the project comply, we prepared a vetting spreadsheet. So we made sure that all of the specifications were included. That came from all of the engineers and the architect. And we sent out a questionnaire to every single supplier to confirm the environmental product declaration, the willingness of them to disclose their chemical content and their mixes, which also sometimes is quite difficult to do, and wherever possible to convince the suppliers to get a declare label to transform our local market. And this process does take a lot of time, as you can imagine. And the greatest barrier I've been facing is market availability, in particular the industry standard of PVC that's included a lot in buildings, and the electrical fixtures and in the fittings that's in the building that are standard built. So finding locally manufactured red list free insulation and PV panels that conform to all the requirements of thermal and energy efficiency is also quite a challenging process that we've worked with. And as I'm sure most of you know, it is quite a challenge to find an E0 formaldehyde board in our local market, and that's also FSC compliant. So as a result, we've had to revert to exceptions, demonstrating that we've sufficiently advocated with suppliers in our market to advance and transform the market. Product durability is also a factor that we have also considered, and focusing on the prolonged life cycle of the building as a good motivating factor. And so the intent of the responsible sourcing imperative links into the local sourcing and extraction of materials. So if you're using materials from the same build, it's beneficial on site, but if it's a high-end residential project, then it does pose some challenges. And on the Rugby Road project, all wood is FSC certified, and there is a chain of custody in place. The natural stone is from Zimbabwe, and it meets the anti-natural stone requirements. And as mentioned before, we need to have a minimum of 2 declare labeled products in our build, and that is an investigatory process at the moment, working with suppliers. And the intent of the living economy sourcing imperative is to foster local communities and businesses. And the goal here is to at least have 75% of the contract sum of local source products. So you can see there by the rings, the bottom point there is Cape Town, where our building is located. And the furthest that we can go up to is 5,000 kilometers from site. So that's up to kind of middle of Africa. And that does limit our product availability quite a bit. So the requirement is that we need to have 20% from 500 kilometers, 30% 1,000 kilometers, and 25% by 5,000 kilometers. And as a resolution, we've had conversations with the Living Future Institute to widen the radius ring to include Europe, which would allow us to source living product challenge and declare labeled products. And this conversation is still ongoing with the Institute. But of course, in this case, there is still a trade-off. So we'd like to have locally sourced products as far as possible. But if compliant products are imported, then there is a health risk involved to those products. So we need to kind of look at it holistically. And that's why the whole material strategy is really critical to achieve the materials petal in the Living Building Challenge. Glencoe Road, which is situated right next to Rugby Road, will have the same material specifications, and it will be constructed following the Rugby Road projects shortly after that. So it has been an exciting and challenging journey working with this material petal, and it would be fantastic once these buildings are constructed and completed. And I think it poses an interesting challenge for the structural engineers that we are working with, and also the suppliers in the local market and our contractors. So yeah, that's the case studies. So thanks for your time. And if you guys want any additional information, just pop on to solidgreen.co.za.
Great. Thanks, Jessie. That was super interesting. I did not realize yet that, that link of materials with a high embodied carbon have usually a lesser health risk to them. So that's a quite interesting thing. Everybody stuck to that time, which is amazing. So we have almost 25, let's keep it 20 minutes. I've got a couple of slides at the end to end off the session with, but we've got 20 minutes for questions, and we were really hoping you guys came prepared and asked these guys the questions that you want to know. So I see there are some questions happening on the chat, but please feel free to raise your hand if you want to use your mic, and you can unmute yourself to ask the question in purpose, or feel free to put the question in the chat box and then I will discuss it with them. Maybe one to discuss first for Denise was the one on the water one, which I thought was quite interesting, with plumbers running away when you start talking about composting options. And maybe just to share, and I would love to see the first project implementing it in South Africa. In the States, they have a 6-story office building with composting toilets. So it's and I've been there and I've seen them, and it's been a very interesting experience where, you know, you go into a toilet cubicle and a motion sensor picks up that you're there, and there's like this little gluey soapy thingy being dispensed in the toilet, and you do your thing, and there's no flushing involved at all, and it doesn't smell. And you go down into the basements where these massive composters are, and they actually showed us, and they opened it, and it was totally odorless. So I've seen it successfully implemented. Love to see it implemented here. Maybe Fabio, what was the system at the school? Do you guys have flush systems or composting toilet dry systems?
There's an on-site wastewater treatment works, so it's not the was it the Macram one that was installed on one of these projects?
Don't remember. Mascam. Oh, yeah. The Mascam. Oh, at your project, yeah.
It's not like the Mascam one, but it is a on-site treatment system.
Okay. Denise, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, Marlies, I think once we open up our borders and we can travel and see what the international world does in the light of the composting solutions, I think the composting is a real solution for Africa, because waterborne sewage is one of our biggest challenges. So yeah, I'd be curious to push that boundary. I know there's cutting edge stuff coming in, but we're definitely not there. We're very, very traditional Victorian mindset of sanitation. And even, you know, like the opportunity of biotreatment, it's something that people bulk against because they don't understand it. But yeah, in this particular case, yeah, very much a conventional system. You wouldn't know it's not a conventional system because it's plumbed in a way that you don't actually know what's going on, and it's all beautifully separated and seamlessly integrated. And I think that's also the secret with design. You know, if you take the challenge out of it, like you said with the Seattle building, you know, people's perception of what it is only becomes a barrier of resistance because they don't understand it. But when it is designed seamlessly that they don't have to interact with it, then I think the adoption rate is a lot higher. So yeah, until we've got the people and the skill set out in Africa, we probably never see those systems really take hold. But yeah, it'd be interesting to view them and see them and experience them.
Thanks. Yeah, and I just, while we were chatting, I also remembered going to, for those of you that are in Johannesburg at Victoria Yards, they have a mobile composting unit, which was also a very pleasant experience. And while we chatting, I'll try to find the link and share it on the chat as well. There was also a question from Milan earlier regarding the Living Community Challenge, and if the school could potentially be part of the Targeting a Living Community Challenge. Fabio, did you guys consider that? And if not, yes. Why not?
So that was one of our very first discussions with LFI was living community versus living building. And from a lot of angles, living community made a lot more sense from a design perspective, from a workload perspective. But the client and team really wanted to focus in on the building side, you know, design the benefits for everyone on that front, which is one of the reasons that we went with living building in the end. As it turns out, those clusters that you saw us mention in that initial top-down layout plan will be processed by LFI as a certification because they are identically designed. So there's 5 clusters, so it's effectively almost like 5 living buildings. But yeah, living community is something that I really think deserves some attention on precinct scale and a South African context.
Yeah, totally. Even if we just pick like 1 or 2 imperatives to apply to precinct, and not necessarily targeting the whole challenge, but just, you know, being motivated by the goals and having that, you know, especially if you talk about water, like having that shared treatment system on a precinct level as opposed to on a building level, that makes a lot more sense. All right.
Just add to that. You know, when you start looking at the community challenge, you know, I'm very curious to find a project that we can look at that really aggressively. Fabio, maybe we should put our heads together because it is interesting, the whole philosophy of design on the community challenge. And I think we have a presentation coming up in the future on it. it's very, very interesting how they've approached I'd say the community challenge certification, and then also how they've looked at, particularly from my interest, on the water and the sanitation integration. Fascinating stuff, and yeah, very curious to see how we can push that boundary as well going forward, because it's a nice challenge. It's an interesting challenge. Yeah.
I see a raised hand from Marty.
How's it, guys? Thanks so much for the talk. I found it amazingly interesting, and thanks, Marloes, for the WhatsApp reminder. It's always helpful. But yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, and I hope I'm not exposing my ignorance with respect to living building challenges too much. But in terms of the school site, with regards to green field site versus brownfield sites, I always thought that was quite a factor, and I'm not too sure. It may have been a brownfield, but it looks like almost an agricultural sort of community, and weren't the issues with building where it was. So I'd like to just try and maybe if you could discuss a little bit about that side of the thing, and then maybe just on the cost aspect, the premium that would have been paid, and then maybe also Marloes on your guys' office, if you can just sort of talk about it high level, not down to every last cent, but I'm just interested. Thanks so much.
Great question. Thank you. Yes, it was a brownfield site, which was historically used for agriculture. And that's one of the aspects that one does need to look at with your site up front. A significant part of that site, bring up that site plan again, will remain agriculturally productive. So the school will produce all its own food. In fact, it will have excess, which is going to be distributing out to surrounding communities, Lombe and those sorts of areas. We had to get an agricultural specialist on board to help quantify and qualify all of that as part of our initial vetting process. It actually suited the site really well to enhance the agricultural productivity from what was effectively derelict at the time.
I don't know if you want to get into the cost question.
You know, allowed to talk about the C word. The cost to it. I don't know, our QS, yeah. ACOM was on board. In fact, they just published a nice article this morning about Green School. I'll paste it in here. Yeah, cost was a big factor on this project. You know, I know there was an aspiration up front from the client, and then the QS got involved, and you know, budget was sort of became clearer, and then as with all building projects, things start getting nipped and tucked. Green, was not too heavily influenced. I mean, there were big ticket items like, when you're looking at your water and your energy side of things, the technologies involved there. The rest of the design cost wasn't a major issue there. One of the aspects that I in fact raised with the other presenters a little bit earlier was the indoor air quality component. In terms of what's required there, you have to either do a pre or post occupancy assessment, or if you don't do that, you have to go through a reset air certification process, which is pretty much non-existent in Africa. And that in itself is a hefty exercise with air monitors and all the rest. So there were aspects of it where there were costs involved that were considered not reasonable, and we've had to work very closely with LFI to find a practical solution in a South African context that still meets with the outcome. But it wasn't unlike a normal green building in terms of just working through the opportunities.
Thanks, Fabio. I just wanted to comment on both questions as well. I think that first brownfield versus greenfield is an important one when you start doing your Living Building Challenge project, because there is an imperative called ecology of place, which basically restricts projects to build on brownfield sites. So if you're building on a greenfield site, you have to have a very good reason to build your building there, and it will then have to be checked with the ILFI if the building would be eligible for a Living Building Challenge project. Regarding the cost of our office, that's also a good question. We obviously try to build as cost effective as possible, and we're definitely not ready yet. And COVID has thrown quite a bit of a spanner in the works. But one thing which was interesting from our office, which we didn't anticipate, but the results is result is pretty cool, is the fact that initially our distribution board got stolen over the December holidays. And then not much later, our municipal meter got stolen from the site, and which resulted in that we very quickly put up some solar panels, and we have not reconnected to the municipality again, to the electricity supply. So we've been off the grid since that all happened. So that's for us quite a big saving, because our electricity bill is basically down to zero, and it works. Like, it really works. We haven't had we don't have to be worried about power cuts anymore. Load shedding doesn't affect us. So yeah, it's a very positive outcome from something not so positive. I see a question on the chat for Jessie from, I hope I'm pronouncing this well, Chisomo Piri. In exploring materials, did you engage with the Ackermann list of new products? Are there any materials in the pipeline that might prove sustainable yet affordable for low-income communities? And thirdly, communities are happier with brick. I wonder if there are any alternatives just as resilient. Sorry, that's a lot of questions, but you can read it in the chat as well. So maybe if you want to tackle them.
For the list of products, we put a database together and had a look at what was on the list internationally, but the South African list is kind of going. I mean, Fabio can probably contribute to this conversation as well. But in terms of pipeline for kind of new material development, that is very much still in development, and I think the best materials for that would be reused bricks, rammed earth, anything on and around the site that's reused, or from demolition sites getting doors and things like that to reuse. There has been some circularity things in place in Cape Town, DigiYard, where the guys do look at taking from demolition sites and taking that stuff and using it for low-cost community development. So that's an initiative that's also in place. But I think in terms of brick, everyone in South Africa likes building with brick because they're familiar with it. So I would just refer to using reused bricks as much as possible. And there are some suppliers that have started to do that. But an alternative that's always best low-embodied construction is wood, and there is some research that's being done in Stellenbosch into the feasibility of ease of construction with wooden products for low cost development. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a loaded answer, but I think there's definitely stuff happening, but it's not straightforward. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessie. Denise, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, just a quick one. Jess, I know everybody's focused heavily on the embedded carbon and stuff. Where does the virtual water and the water come into the materials? Because I know it's relevant. I'm just not sure how relevant or where it comes in and how it's measured and stuff like that. Could you maybe shed some light on that?
I think it falls more under the LCA. So what's related to the chemicals that go into the product itself, what's produced when it's manufactured. And then there's different aspects that's looked at, like ecology, toxology, CO2 is just one of them, to name a few of the things that the LCA report produces. So I think natural resource depletion would fall under that, and water would be in that category. So not enough, I would say, to answer your question, but there's a lot of detail.
Okay, now I'll have a look. Is there specific interest in, like, the water usage in the construction process? How do we save that? How do we look at the conservation of that? And how does that reflect in the project? Or is that also part of LCA? Madelice, maybe you know a little bit more. I'm just trying to get some more clarity there. Because Lizette and I have been running down this virtual water thing and the reality of this embedded water as well.
I know it's very heavily featured in the Living Product Challenge. So that's obviously per product. It's not so much in the actual Living Building Challenge system.
But
in the other system.
There wouldn't be too much water during construction. I mean, from my experience working with projects, when we track the water for interiors, water, energy, water's not a lot. It's being used maybe just for cement mixing and cleaning.
Great. I see there's a question from Albert John. Interesting. Any opportunities for green funding, rebates, carbon credits, and other financial incentives for our clients, developers? Fabio, I see you're very keen to take this one.
Yes,
Go for it.
Favorite topics. Yeah, I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago, which looked at where things are globally with green finance and incentives, and it's one of those major issues. You speak to a developer in South Africa, and you tell them that there is green finance available for SDG aligned projects or projects that are aligned with climate, at a 3% interest rate, and they want to throw projects, into the ground. But those interest rates are typically only available through institutions like Land Bank, for example, and other government areas, organizations which don't pass on those savings. And banks are now starting to leverage that as well, but those low interest rates are not, there's no sort of walking the talk. There's a lot of talk, but there's not much walking. I think that's one of the areas where, in a South African context, there really needs to be a much bolder walk from the financial institutions or other, financial entrepreneurs. I think that's a massive point of leverage to incentivize these types of developments and regenerative design.
Thanks, Fabio.
Sorry, Molu, just one more comment.
Sure.
The question on how much it costs from a green perspective. When the dust has settled on Green School, we will be sitting down with the QS to run through that, and we'd very much like to see what that metric is for Green School, and we'll certainly share it with LFC.
Great. Thank you all, and thanks for all the questions. I think it's a super interesting. Applying the Living Building Challenge principles to South Africa is not always easy, and the idea behind Living Future and our collaborative is also to collaborate. So, if you have questions on this, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help and to share our experience and, share, and especially on the material side, there's an enormous amount of time and energy that we invest in these projects, and we're building up this database of materials. And we're happy to share because we don't really want people to do things, twice. So yeah, please reach out to us on that. Thank you very much for attending this session. Some exciting things coming up. Next month, we are planning a Living Product Challenge webinar. So we're going to talk about what does it mean to have a Living Product Challenge. So if you know manufacturers or product suppliers that would be interested in that and be inspired by a Living Product Challenge, we'll have international speakers for this because there's not many Living Product Challenge projects in South Africa. And we're going to have the human scale furniture featured and present on their products. And then in August, you've heard Fabio talking about biophilia and how it has sort of impacted their project and influenced the design of their project. It's one of the imperatives in the Living Building Challenge, and we're going to talk about that topic in August. So some exciting things coming up. And so, so I just want to say it's time to create a living future and a world full of living buildings. If you find this inspiring and you want to have an introduction into the Living Building Challenge, into the actual system, or share this with your practice, your architectural practice or engineering practice or landscaping practice or other company, just reach out to us. We have 3 ambassadors and LFAs in South Africa that are able to present on this, and free of charge. We will present probably online, which is the most efficient way, and come and present to your team to tell you all about the Living Building Challenge. So feel free to reach out. Where to find us? Email, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just keep on following us, and I hope you guys find the stuff that we're doing are interesting. So in closing, again, our previous events and also this event, they are recorded and will be available on my Greenet website. So you can look at the previous recordings. We've got one on net positive energy and fully dedicated to net positive water, and also materials, embodied carbon of materials. So if you're interested in any of those topics, just go there. And there will also be Eventbrite email tomorrow with a thank you and all the links and questions in there that you can then refer to. I really have to say thank you to our sponsors, Legaro. They've been so generous to sponsor and make this webinar possible. So thank you to them for being part of this webinar. And then thank you to our speakers. Thank you guys, you've been amazing. And thank you for sharing your stories. And then lastly, on the Living Future accreditation. So this is, if you want to become an accredited professional, there is a education program available from the ILFI. You have to go through a foundational program that teaches you about all their programs and what Living Building Challenge is all about. Challenge, Living Product Challenge, and you'll get an actual certification. We have, I think at the moment, 3 LFA accredited people in the country. So we would love to get a bigger community of accredited people. And with that, I'm gonna say very, very thank you to everyone for attending. I keep on being amazed that the Zoom fatigue has not set in and that there's still so many people registering for our webinar. So I'm glad we seem to be very relevant and that you like to hear what we're doing. So also in your Google Forms or we super open to feedback. And if you have any topics that you want us to cover, please reach out to us. And with that, I think we are right on time to close it. I want to wish you a very good evening. And again, thank you to all our speakers and to our sponsor, Legaro Properties, for making this happen. Have a good evening.
Thanks, guys. It was brilliant. Well done.
Thank you, everyone.